New York, autumn. The air carried the scent of damp leaves, street-cart coffee, and something subtly new that every season brought. In a cozy, unpretentious Brooklyn neighborhood where warm light spilled from apartment windows, sat Dr. Isaiah Wilson's small but well-known veterinary clinic. Isaiah unlocked the door. On the doorstep stood a young white woman, about 25, her face contorted with fear and desperation. Her light hair was disheveled, a streak of dirt visible on her cheek. In her arms, she clutched a small, frightened cat. The animal looked bad. Its fur was matted, and blood oozed from its side. The cat whimpered softly, its eyes clouded. "Doctor, please help," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He was hit by a car. He's dying." In that moment, Isaiah saw only pain, only a creature in need. He didn't see skin color, status, or anything else beyond urgent medical attention. His surgeon's instincts immediately kicked in. He opened the door wider, letting the woman inside. "Come in," he said firmly but calmly, his voice devoid of any emotion except focus. "Quickly, to the exam table. I'm coming." Isaiah moved quickly and professionally. He placed the cat on the table, retrieving the necessary instruments. The woman, hands clasped to her chest, watched his every move. Her nervousness was contagious, but he tried not to let it affect him. He began the examination, his skilled fingers gently exploring the animal's injuries. The wound was deep, possibly a fractured rib, which could mean a punctured lung. "He needs immediate surgery," he said, without looking up from the cat. "I'll do everything I can, but I'll need your details for registration, and this will be expensive." The woman sobbed. "I don't have any money, none. I saw him get hit. Couldn't just walk by. I only have this." She frantically rummaged in her pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. "It's a check for a large sum sent today. It hasn't been cashed yet, but it's all I have. I'll give whatever it takes. Just save him." Isaiah took the check. It bore a substantial amount and a signature. The check was made out to a Claire Smith. He glanced at it, but immediately returned his attention to the animal. His thoughts were consumed by only one thing: how to save the cat. The surgery was long. The cat clung to life, and Isaiah, forgetting his exhaustion, fought for it. Finally, after 2 hours, he straightened up. The operation was successful. The cat was saved. Exhausted but satisfied, Isaiah turned to the woman. "It's okay," he said. "He's going to live." The woman's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. She rushed towards him, trying to hug him, but Isaiah gently pushed her away. "I'm glad I could help," he said, "but you'll need to fill out some paperwork. And, if you can, explain why you brought the cat so late and why the check hasn't been cashed." The woman hesitated. I work for someone who doesn't like noise. And the cat, he was at their place, and they wanted to get rid of him. I just took him and ran when he got hurt, and the check, it belongs to them. I just took it to pay for the cat. They don't know." Something in her words made Isaiah uneasy. He felt a chill run down his spine. Had she stolen this check? His gaze fell again on the check, lying on the counter. The signature was large, sprawling. Smith. He hadn't paid attention to it before, but now. Suddenly, the clinic door burst open, and 2 police officers appeared on the threshold. Their faces were stern, their gazes sharp. Behind them, breathing heavily, stood a man in an expensive suit, his face contorted with rage. It was Richard Smith, one of New York's most influential and, as they said, most ruthless real estate magnates. He was known for his racist views, which he didn't hide in his inner circles. Isaiah didn't know him personally, but he had heard of him. Smith pointed at the woman. "There she is. She stole my check," he roared. "And you." His gaze shifted to Isaiah, full of contempt. "You, doctor, you're an accomplice, a black doctor and a white thief. What a pair." Isaiah's breath caught in his throat. The accusation was absurd, but Smith's words, hurled with such blatant hatred, struck deep. He had just saved an animal, shown compassion, and this is what he got in return. The police officers seemed to be on Smith's side. They were already pulling out handcuffs. Isaiah, maintaining his composure, tried to explain the situation. He showed them the check, explained that he was simply providing medical aid. He even pointed to the saved cat, still lying on the table. But the officers seemed deaf to reason. "Hands behind your head, doctor," one of them said sharply. The woman cried out, trying to defend Isaiah. "He has nothing to do with it. I did it all myself. He's just a good man." But her words were drowned out by Smith's angry voice, who continued to insult Isaiah, calling him a dirty thief and a disgrace to the profession. In that moment, Isaiah felt not only anger, but a deep, burning pain. This wasn't just an accusation of theft. It was an accusation that he, a black man, dared to help a white woman and receive money from her. It was a racial insult that pierced him to his core. Isaiah did not break. He looked at Richard Smith, then at the police officers. He saw in their eyes not just prejudice, but ignorance, a product of a system that allowed people like Smith to spread hate with impunity. Isaiah, recalling his mother, who always told him, "Never bow your head," slowly lowered his hands. "I am not guilty," he said, his voice calm, but filled with hidden power. He didn't offer excuses, didn't beg. Instead, he uttered the words that changed the course of that night. "I insist on a full review of the surveillance footage from my clinic. Everything that happened is recorded. And I demand the presence of my lawyer. Now." These words, delivered with such unexpected confidence and firmness, made the officers hesitate. Their certainty in Smith's righteousness, which had seemed unwavering until then, cracked. Isaiah didn't look like someone they were used to seeing in these situations. He was calm, professional, and his demand was perfectly legal. Richard Smith, noticing their hesitation, snarled, "Don't listen to him. He's lying. He's just stalling." But his tone had changed. Notes of panic, which Isaiah didn't miss, had crept in. One of the officers, younger, glanced at his partner, then at Isaiah. "He has a right," he said quietly. "We need to check." The second officer, older and with a wearier gaze, nodded. "All right, we'll check the footage. But you, doctor, and you, miss, you both stay here until we figure out all the details." The officers began reviewing the recordings. Isaiah and the woman, whose name turned out to be Sarah, sat in the waiting room, waiting. The tension hung in the air, thick and palpable. Sarah was trembling. "I didn't want any trouble, doctor," she whispered. "I just wanted to save the cat." Isaiah nodded. "I understand, and I believe you." His words, simple and sincere, brought her some relief. Soon, a shout came from the room where the recordings were being reviewed. The young officer emerged, his face pale. "We saw everything," he said, looking at his partner. "The video clearly shows Miss Sarah bringing the cat in critical condition, and how Dr. Wilson immediately proceeded with the surgery. The check was handed over only afterwards, and the doctor didn't even look at it at first. He looked at Smith with disapproval. "Your accusations, Mr. Smith, are unfounded." Richard Smith turned purple. "It's a fake. He set it all up," he bellowed. But his words sounded pathetic and desperate. The officers, now without a shadow of a doubt, approached Smith. "Mr. Smith, you are accused of filing a false report and obstruction of justice," the older officer said. "You'll have to come with us." As Smith was led away, Isaiah felt relief, but also deep bitterness. He had saved a life, shown compassion, and for that he was nearly deprived of his freedom simply because he was black. This incident, this injustice, deeply affected him. He understood that similar incidents happened constantly, and many lacked the opportunity or means to defend themselves. His personal experience, though it ended in his favor, opened his eyes to the scale of the systemic problem. The cold dread that had settled in his stomach slowly began to recede, replaced by a steely resolve. This wasn't just about a stolen check or a rescued cat. It was about the insidious nature of prejudice and the unyielding fight for dignity. In the days that followed, Isaiah Wilson's story spread throughout New York. Thanks to active social media users who learned about the incident and some persistent journalists, the case gained widespread attention. People were outraged by Richard Smith's brazenness and the officer's clear bias. It soon came out that Smith had been involved in previous racism-related scandals, but thanks to his money and connections, he had always escaped consequences. This time, things were different. Isaiah's clinic, Hearts and Paws, became the center of attention. Local TV stations interviewed him, and newspapers wrote about his resilience and professionalism. People came to the clinic, leaving flowers and thank-you notes. Isaiah, though embarrassed by the sudden popularity, understood that this wasn't just about him. It was about something much larger. It was about the fight for justice and how a small spark could ignite a flame of change. His wife, Abby, and son, Jamal, were incredibly proud of him. Jamal, listening to the news on TV, asked, "Daddy, why is that Mr. Smith so mean?" Isaiah, hugging his son, replied, "Some people just don't see the world the way it is, son. But the important thing is to be kind and strong, no matter what." The support from his family was a solid anchor in the swirling chaos of newfound public attention. After this incident, Isaiah felt a new drive within him. He had always been a doctor, but now he also felt like an activist. He began participating in local initiatives to combat racial discrimination. He used his platform to speak about bias in law enforcement, the need for systemic change, and the importance of fighting for equality. One day, a young black man named Jimmy came to his clinic with an injured stray dog. Jimmy was scared. He didn't know how he would pay for the treatment. Isaiah didn't charge him a dime. He not only healed the dog, but also talked with Jimmy, sharing his own story. He saw in the young man's eyes the same pain and fear he had once experienced. He understood that his experience wasn't just his personal story, but part of the collective experience of black people in America. He decided to establish a fund to help animals whose owners couldn't afford treatment, naming it Hope after the rescued puppy. This fund would be a tangible way to counteract the very system that had nearly entrapped him, providing access to care for those often marginalized. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Despite public support, Isaiah faced new manifestations of bias. Anonymous, threatening calls, attempts to tarnish his online reputation. Even some investors who had previously shown interest in his clinic suddenly pulled back, citing image instability. These were subtle, almost invisible forms of systemic racism, so-called microaggressions, that gradually wore him down. But Isaiah didn't give up. Every time he felt resentment or fatigue creeping in, he recalled Sarah's face, her desperation, and the eyes of the rescued cat. He remembered his mother's words, and he found the strength to keep going. He started attending support groups for Black professionals, sharing his experiences and drawing strength from others. He realized he wasn't alone in this fight, and this solidarity gave him incredible energy. His internal growth was evident. From a man focused solely on his profession, he transformed into a leader who wasn't afraid to speak openly about social injustice. His voice, once confined to surgical consultations, now resonated with conviction on public forums. Isaiah's story had a domino effect. Under public pressure, the Brooklyn Police Department launched an internal investigation into the bias of certain officers. Several individuals were suspended, and mandatory training on racial tolerance and communication ethics was implemented for the entire force. It was a small step, but a significant one. Moreover, Richard Smith's case became a precedent. New discrimination lawsuits were filed against him by former employees who, inspired by Isaiah's and Sarah's courage, found the strength to speak up. Smith's reputation was utterly destroyed, and his empire began to crumble. He learned, in the most public way possible, that wealth could not always shield one from the consequences of their hatred. Isaiah, meanwhile, continued his work. He opened several free clinics for homeless animals in underserved areas of the city, where quality veterinary care was almost inaccessible. He mentored young students, instilling in them not only medical knowledge but also principles of compassion, equality, and social responsibility. His impact stretched far beyond his clinic walls, sowing seeds of change in the hearts and minds of the next generation. A year passed. It was autumn again, and New York was once more bathed in golden light. Isaiah Wilson's life had changed dramatically. He had become famous, not because he craved it, but because his story had become a powerful symbol. His clinic thrived, and his Hope Fund saved hundreds of animals. He was still a veterinary surgeon who loved his job, but now he was something more, a voice, a protector, a beacon of hope for those who faced injustice. One evening, reading Jamal his dinosaur book, Isaiah paused on a page where a mighty T-Rex protected its young. He looked at his son and said, "You know, Jamal, sometimes the biggest monsters aren't the ones with sharp teeth. Sometimes they live in people's hearts. But even the smallest and kindest of us can defeat them if we are brave and not afraid to speak the truth." Jamal nodded, listening intently. Isaiah hugged his son, feeling warmth and peace. He knew that there would always be injustice and prejudice in the world, but he also knew that there would always be people willing to fight for good. He was one of them. And that knowledge was his greatest treasure. He had truly transformed from a man who meticulously cared for animals to a man who fearlessly championed humanity, having found his true purpose in the wake of adversity. The warm glow of autumn had long faded, replaced by the relentless, humid embrace of a Philadelphia summer. A year had passed since the incident with Richard Smith, a year that had reshaped Dr. Isaiah Wilson's life in profound ways. New York had watched, listened, and rallied. His clinic thrived, his Hope Fund for Animals in underserved communities now a significant entity, saving hundreds of lives. He remained the skilled veterinary surgeon, still deeply loving his work. But his purpose had expanded. He was a voice, a defender, a beacon of hope for those navigating injustice. Just last night, reading to Jamal, he'd paused on a page where a giant T-Rex protected its young. "You know, Jamal," he'd said, "sometimes the biggest monsters aren't the ones with sharp teeth. Sometimes they live in people's hearts. But even the smallest and kindest of us can defeat them, if we're brave and not afraid to speak the truth." Jamal had nodded, eyes wide with understanding. Isaiah had hugged his son, feeling warmth and peace. He knew injustice and prejudice would always exist, but he also knew there would always be people fighting for good. He was one of them, and that knowledge was his greatest wealth. Now, as Isaiah stepped out of his rental car into the sweltering Philadelphia air, the weight of that knowledge felt particularly heavy. The air shimmered above the asphalt, carrying the scent of exhaust fumes, blooming hydrangeas, and the faint, underlying hum of a city always on the brink. This wasn't the manicured quiet of his Brooklyn neighborhood, nor the hushed reverence of the Archibald Library. This was an old, historically underserved neighborhood where brick row houses stood shoulder to shoulder, their paint peeling like old skin. Here, life spilled onto the streets. Kids on skateboards, music thumping from open windows, the chatter of neighbors on stoops. He was here because of a promise. The ripple effect of the Smith incident had brought recognition, yes, but more importantly, it had brought responsibility. His Hope Fund had secured a significant grant, allowing him to realize a long-held dream, establishing a pop-up animal clinic within the newly renovated community center. It was a small, bright spot in a neighborhood that often felt forgotten, a beacon of care where resources were scarce. The community center itself was an old, sprawling building, once a forgotten school. Years of neglect had left it crumbling, but recent grassroots efforts had transformed its ground floor into a vibrant hub. Fresh paint, new windows, and a small but well-tended garden out front spoke of hope. Isaiah's pop-up clinic was set up in what used to be the old art room, its large windows letting in a flood of light, though the stifling summer heat still permeated the space. He had brought two of his most trusted assistants from New York, dedicated young vets eager to make a difference. Maya, a sharp, empathetic black woman, and Luis, a meticulous and calm Latino man. Today was the grand opening, a soft launch for the neighborhood. Isaiah moved through the newly arranged space, his movements deliberate and practiced, despite the perspiration beading on his brow. He checked the sterile instruments, aligned the gleaming cages, and ensured the examination tables were spotless. His mind, the engineer's mind, was already mapping out the workflow, anticipating every possible scenario. He was dressed simply in a lightweight polo shirt and khakis, an effort to blend in, to project accessibility. He wanted this clinic to feel like a safe haven, a place where people felt comfortable bringing their beloved pets regardless of their financial situation or background. The buzz of excitement was palpable. Local families, many with children clutching nervous-looking dogs and cats, began to trickle in, the air filled with a chorus of gentle barks, soft meows, and the anxious murmurs of pet owners. Isaiah greeted each person with a warm smile, his eyes radiating kindness and genuine interest. He knelt to eye level with the children, offering words of reassurance about their furry friends. He truly loved this work, the direct connection with the community, the immediate impact he could make. As the first few appointments began, a sense of calm efficiency settled over the clinic. His assistants, Maya and Luis, moved seamlessly, taking histories and preparing animals for examination. Isaiah himself was performing the initial consultations, his gentle touch and reassuring voice instantly putting both pets and owners at ease. He was currently examining an elderly pit bull mix named Duke, whose owner, an older black woman with tired but kind eyes, looked at him with deep trust. Duke had a chronic cough, and Isaiah was carefully listening to his lungs, his brow furrowed in concentration. Councilman Jenkins, his voice surprisingly loud in the bustling clinic, spoke without preamble. "Dr. Wilson, I presume?" His tone was not a question but an accusation. "We need to have a word about this operation." The unfamiliar man beside him remained silent, but his gaze, hard and unwavering, swept over the diverse faces in the room, lingering just a fraction too long on the black and brown families. A prickle of unease, familiar and unwelcome, began to spread through Isaiah. The warmth of the summer afternoon, the vibrant energy of the community, suddenly felt cold, permeated by an unspoken threat. Councilman Jenkins stepped further into the clinic, the unknown man trailing behind him. "We've received concerns, Doctor Wilson," Jenkins stated, his voice carefully controlled but laced with condescension, "about your methods and the nature of this operation." He gestured vaguely at the waiting room, filled with families and their pets. The unknown man held out his clipboard, revealing an official-looking document. "This is a cease and desist order," he announced, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You are operating without the proper permits, and we have reports of unsanitary conditions." Isaiah's heart sank. "Unsanitary? That's impossible. We just opened. Everything is brand new, sterilized." He looked at Maya and Luis, who stood frozen, their faces reflecting his own shock and dismay. Jenkins ignored him, turning to the other man. "Mr. Harrison, if you would explain?" Mr. Harrison, a city inspector, began to list a series of alleged violations: insufficient ventilation, improper waste disposal, despite the designated biohazard bins, even a claim of unlicensed staff, clearly aimed at Maya and Luis, both fully certified. The accusations were baseless, designed to overwhelm and intimidate. Isaiah tried to interject, to explain their meticulous preparation, their legal permits from the state, but Jenkins and Harrison cut him off, their voices raising in volume, drawing more attention. "We understand you have a reputation, Doctor." "Wilson," Jenkins sneered, "but this is Philadelphia. We have our own standards, and frankly, this pop-up concept, it doesn't fit the established order of care in this district." The unspoken message was clear. This clinic, serving this community, was not welcome. It was not welcome because of who it served. The families in the waiting room, sensing the shift in atmosphere, began to shrink back, some murmuring nervously. Their faces, initially filled with hope, now reflected suspicion and fear. Isaiah felt a familiar tightening in his chest. It wasn't just about permits. It was about control, about who got to decide what kind of care these people deserved. It was about denying access, dressed up in bureaucracy. He saw the same subtle disdain in Harrison's eyes that he had seen in Finch's at the library and in Smith's before that. It was the disdain of privilege, the belief that certain spaces and services were not meant for certain people, or for certain people to provide. "This is outrageous," Isaiah finally asserted, his voice cutting through their rhetoric. "You're making baseless accusations. We have all the necessary state licenses and health certifications." He pulled out a binder filled with meticulously organized documents. Jenkins scoffed, but Harrison looked momentarily flustered. Then a young woman, a local community activist named Keisha, who had been organizing the community center's renovation, stepped forward. "Councilman Jenkins," she said, her voice clear and strong, "we have cameras all over this center. Every inch of this clinic is monitored, and every person here today, every family, is a witness. If there are unsanitary conditions or unlicensed staff, we will see it. And if there aren't, then we will see exactly what this looks like." Her words, simple but powerful, caused a stir among the waiting families. Muted murmurs of agreement began to spread. The tide was turning. Jenkins's face flushed, and Harrison's eyes darted nervously towards the ceiling, where a small, unassuming security camera was mounted. The unspoken truth hung in the sweltering air. There were no real violations, only a pretense to shut down a much-needed service for a specific community. The concerned citizens likely didn't exist, or were a proxy for the powerful interest Jenkins represented, perhaps fearing this influx of positive change in a district they preferred to keep underserved. The standoff continued for what felt like an eternity. Jenkins and Harrison, realizing their bluff had been called and their actions were being recorded, began to backtrack. They conceded to reviewing the camera footage and promised to conduct a thorough and unbiased inspection later that week. It was a temporary reprieve, but a victory nonetheless. The families who had huddled in silence slowly began to relax, a wave of relief washing over the room. Isaiah, though drained, felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about opening a clinic. It was about fighting for the right of a community to have access to dignity and care, a right often denied through systemic gatekeeping. He saw the flicker of hope rekindled in the eyes of the elderly woman with Duke. The subsequent inspection, monitored by community leaders and local media, found no violations. The pop-up clinic thrived, quickly becoming an invaluable resource. However, the incident highlighted a deeper issue, the way seemingly neutral bureaucratic processes could be weaponized against black communities. Isaiah realized this fight wasn't just about overt racism, but also about dismantling the subtle, often invisible barriers woven into the fabric of urban systems. Isaiah began to collaborate more closely with Keisha and other community organizers. They delved into local policies, examining everything from zoning laws to public health initiatives. They discovered a pattern. Funds designated for community development in this particular district were often rerouted or bogged down by bureaucratic red tape, leaving essential services chronically underfunded or non-existent. This was the true systemic racism at play, not just individual prejudice, but a framework designed to neglect and disadvantage. They organized town hall meetings empowering residents to voice their concerns. Isaiah, using his newfound prominence, spoke passionately about the right to equitable services, connecting the denial of veterinary care to the larger issues of health care, education, and economic opportunity. His calm, authoritative voice, combined with his undeniable compassion, resonated deeply with the community. He was no longer just a doctor for animals. He was a doctor for the community's well-being. The resistance was subtle but persistent. Councilman Jenkins tried to discredit him, spreading rumors about his true motives and attempting to paint him as an outside agitator. But Isaiah was experienced in these battles now. He met every whisper with transparency, every accusation with facts. He and Keisha worked tirelessly, meticulously documenting every instance of neglect and every biased policy. Their diligence paid off. Armed with irrefutable evidence, Isaiah and Keisha presented their findings to a wider coalition of community leaders and a few sympathetic journalists. They exposed how city planning decisions had systematically marginalized this district, creating a cycle of underinvestment and neglect. They revealed how Jenkins, through his connections, had benefited personally from projects that should have gone to community services, effectively siphoning funds meant for public good. The concerned citizens were revealed to be a front for business interests who wanted to maintain the status quo, fearing that community empowerment might lead to demands for higher wages or better environmental regulations in their nearby factories. The exposé created a firestorm. Local news outlets picked up the story, then national ones. The narrative of a dedicated doctor fighting for a forgotten community, juxtaposed against the alleged corruption of a city official, captivated the public. Councilman Jenkins found himself under intense scrutiny, facing a formal investigation from the City Ethics Committee. The community, emboldened, held mass rallies demanding his resignation and a full audit of city spending in their district. The pressure was immense, and Jenkins, unlike Smith, didn't have the same level of untouchable power. He resigned, his political career in tatters. The subsequent investigation led to significant reforms in city spending and a renewed focus on equitable development. Funds that had been siphoned off were redirected back into the community, leading to actual improvements in schools, public health services, and, of course, the community center. Isaiah's pop-up clinic in Philadelphia became a permanent fixture, expanding its services and becoming a model for similar initiatives in other underserved cities. He continued his work, balancing his New York practice with his growing role as a national advocate for social justice. He understood that healing was not just about treating symptoms, but about addressing the root causes of injustice. The Philadelphia summer, once threatening, now felt like a symbol of the fiery spirit of a community empowered to fight for its rights. Isaiah, walking through the now bustling community center, saw children playing freely, their laughter echoing through the halls. He saw families bringing their healthy, well-cared-for pets to the clinic. He saw the tangible impact of standing firm, of refusing to back down in the face of systemic adversity. The cracks in the pavement were slowly, painstakingly beginning to heal.